So before we officially get started, let me remind you, this is your tutorial, your time. So if you have questions as I'm going through the presentation, please feel free to stop me, raise your hand, ask your question. Even if you think you have a topic for your PSA that's kind of related to this idea and maybe you want some further soundboard for kind of bouncing ideas, I'm happy to do that. Now, I do recognize that maybe some of you are here just because you had to be at one of these things. Thank you so much for doing your job anyways as a student. That's appreciated. So let's get going. So we're going to talk about the history of abalone in California. The scientific name for abalone, they are in the genus Haliotis, okay, which is why you see it up there. So the relationship with abalone goes back a long time, starting with the original people here in California. They used abalone for a multitude of purposes, number one being as a food source. Abalone are this thick, muscular organism that lives under a shell. And that strong, muscular foot was a great source of protein. It could be stored and dried. It's a good source of omega-3 fatty acids, so really high energy but healthy energy sources for original people. They also used abalone shells in their cultural clothing and decorations, and oftentimes people could recognize where men, women, children kind of came from, what original group they came from based off of how they wore abalone shells in their clothing. You know, did they wear them as earrings? Did they wear them in as belts or different decorative pieces for both cultural ceremony as well as everyday dress and appearance. Okay. Also, they even used abalone shells as an original form of currency in the trade of that. And I've got some samples of abalone shells here with me. Come on in, ladies. Here with me from two different species going on. So you're welcome to take a look at these after the presentation, but to give you an idea, I don't know why it went there. Give me a second. There we go. So I've got two different species of abalone. Okay, I have our pink abalone. This was actually cleaned up to the best of our ability. I had a friend whose neighbor was redoing their backyard, and they were digging out their backyard for some more stuff, and they found a hole with 80 of these shells just shoved into it. Like, what else? Chuck. And then they covered it up with dirt. Okay? This is a pink abalone shell. You can tell from the number of respiratory pores, or the number of holes in the shell, and also the way it sits a little bit more rigid and it has a little bit more of a scalloped edge compared to this green abalone shell. Okay, this is one I found out in Catalina while diving. So again, it's been sitting underwater for quite a bit of time. It usually has a much more vibrant kind of rainbow lacquer on the inside, but a lot of that is that saltwater corrosion on the inside. If I use too much of a caustic or a harsh chemical trying to clean these up, I can actually strip the lacquer out of these. So I have to kind of be careful in terms of how. But notice this one sits much flatter to the surface than this one. These are two different species. So I've got samples of these up front for you to take a look at if you want, as well as informational cards on all 7 species of abalone here in California. You can see from our image there, we do have 7 species of abalone here in California, ranging the entire coast, including going up the Pacific Northwest and down through Baja, Mexico. Okay? All 7 species of abalone in California are endangered. Now, I have a question for you. The indigenous word for abalone, okay, only encompassed, and when talking about red and black abalone, okay, that word alone, okay, which was then later changed and hybridized to become abalone. It was brought over with the Spanish. Why would the indigenous word for abalone only be in consideration for the black and the red species? Again, there are 7 species, but that word only covers 2 of them. What are some thoughts?
Maybe because those are like the more vibrant and more desired ones for indigenous people, like for decorations or something?
Maybe they were more highly desirable for indigenous people. Sure, that's an idea. What else? Yep.
Maybe it has to do with like color.
Sure. Colored.
Like an indigenous word for the color.
Yeah. So the color on the abalone, or the name for a lot of the abalone, although there are some species of abalone that don't have a color name. There are flat abalone, there are pinto abalone that are not necessarily colors. A lot of it does have to do with kind of the color on the outside of that shell, as well as the color of their actual flesh. But color is sometimes a really hard thing to talk about in science. It's really subjective too as well, okay? And so usually the ladies get this a little bit more than the gentlemen. That's not to put anyone on blast, but if you ask most ladies what color blue is that, they might say it's midnight, it's cerulean, it's baby, whereas the guy's like, it's blue. And they're kind of happy with just that. So color's a really hard one. So if we look at the distribution of abalone along the coast, okay, notice our white abalone tend to be our deepest species. Our black and our red tend to be our more shallow species. Those were the ones that the original people were most used to seeing. They weren't on scuba tanks going out diving deep to find other types of abalone. They only ever really saw the black and the red species. Okay? So that's what they named. That's all they kind of really knew of abalone. As I mentioned on Friday, November of last year, of 2024, the black abalone was declared as the California state seashell. A law put into, or first kind of brought up and championed by our local representative, Diane Dixon. Currently, black and white abalone are endangered. The other species of abalone are threatened, so just one step lower than endangered, okay? And all abalone fisheries in California are shut down. Maybe in 2026, depending how the populations and the numbers do, there may be consideration for reopening the green and the red fisheries, but currently it's not really looking that great in terms of those numbers. So again, we still have a deep connection with abalone in our history for our economy, especially up north towards the Monterey area. So again, lots of indigenous people used abalone, including our local indigenous tribes, the Tongva and the Achumen people. They used it for decoration not only on themselves, but also on their ships. So this boat here, a kiat, right, was the Tongva boat. That's our local indigenous people, and they would put abalone shells kind of inlaid along the sides and front of the boat to kind of announce, we're here, look at us, look at the abundance and the kind of the wealth that we have as a people. Abalone shells are also quite durable, and so they were even shaped and crafted into hooks for fishing, okay, as well as being laid into their boat craft as well. But with the loss of abalone, not only has that impacted current indigenous people in terms of a loss of some of their culture, but it's also impacted ecosystems as well, because abalone are pretty important organisms. So let me tell you a story about 3 organisms. Abalone, sea otters, and urchins. Okay? Now, it always kind of bums me out when I think about this story, because, right, everyone sees a sea otter and they're like, oh my gosh, they're so cute. Do you know we used to have sea otters in Southern California? They used to be down here. But at one point there was a law that was passed that actually made it illegal for sea otters to be here. Not only were sea otters populations largely decimated by people all across California because of hunting for their furs and their pelts, but there were fishermen in Southern California that actually lobbied at Congress to say, we don't want sea otters in our ocean, in our fishing areas. We don't want to compete with sea otters for fish. Because if you're a fisherman, you're going for the same organisms that sea otter is trying to eat. So we don't want to compete with them. So let's make a law that says it's illegal for them to be here. And they did. We would capture sea otters, even after the point where you could no longer capture them and kill them for their pelts. We would capture sea otters and move them up north, okay, to the Monterey area. This is why you can go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium and see sea otters out in the wild, okay, though their populations are low. So that exclusion law actually ended in 2013. But the sea otters were kind of already used to not being around here. So even though the law ended, we still didn't have them around. And as a result, that way threw off the balance of nature. Because sea otters not only eat abalone and fish, but one of their favorite snacks are sea urchin. Okay? Those purple and pink spiky things. And sea urchin are voracious, super hungry little herbivores. They can clean up a kelp bed in nothing flat. Okay? Their mouthpiece is something called a radula. So it's kind of like an old school push mower, and they just kind of roll along kelp. Okay? Roll along that kelp and just mow up all that kelp, which now makes it harder for other organisms to live and survive. Without the sea otters being present, the urchins flourished, now creating these urchin barrens and these wastelands. There was no kelp, there were no other organisms around, there was no reason for sea otters to come back. And abalone now started to run out of a food source because they couldn't outcompete the urchin for kelp, and they ran out of space to live on. These abalone, I mean, think about it. You have a flat, muscular organism living underneath this shell. It needs a flat surface space to be on. It can't live on like the curved side of a rock. It can't live in a crack or crevice with openness underneath its foot. It needs to have as much contact with a flat surface as possible to hang on in that current. Urchins tend to break up that rock. Urchins, in order to also kind of hunker down, and though we like urchins sometimes, they do help to create our tide pools. Urchins with their spikes, when they find a place that they like to live, they hunker down and then they do a little wiggle dance. And those spikes kind of carve out the rock, and then when the urchin dies, that creates a hole, which then might get filled in with other little pebbles and rocks that get turned over by waves, creating some of our larger tide pools. Abalone can't live on just kind of an edge or a cliff. So if there's too many of those holes and pockets, there's no space for those abalone to live. So the loss of our sea otters, the overtaking of urchins, also added to the decline of abalone in our population. Yeah?
Has there ever been talk of reintroducing them to our environment?
Yeah, so there are currently people working with abalone restoration, but there's a couple of issues.
About the sea otters.
Oh, with sea otters.
Or is water temp an issue?
No, water temp's not an issue. So there are a southern population of sea otters that should be able to be down here. There's just so few wild otters right now, even up north. We don't know if we remove some of those from that northern population and bring them down, if there's enough food here that would sustain them, and if there's enough of them with enough genetic diversity where reproduction would actually be successful. They're already such a low quantity. But even our abalone, there are people working on restoration of abalone as well, but one of the issues here, especially in Laguna Beach, is because we're a marine protected area, which says we can't take anything out, it's illegal to do that. That law says we also can't put anything in, even if it's good, natural, and belongs there. We can't remove anything from a marine protected area, even if it's bad and doesn't belong there. We have to leave it alone. So lots of complications there. This is Laguna Beach. This is actually Main Beach. Every single one of those white dots was a black abalone. That's how prevalent they were. It was not uncommon for people to go out in the 40s, 50s, 60s, out to the beach for a picnic and bring no food. They'd just come out, they'd dig up some clams, they'd go pick up a couple of abalone and set up a nice little barbecue. That's how prevalent it was. Now, you don't see them. I have never seen a black abalone in our tide pools. And remember, black abalone should be the easiest ones to see, right? They're at the highest level in our tide pools. That's where they should be. I've never seen it. And it's because there used to be so many of them, people would eat them all, okay? So loss of habitat, yep.
Why are some of the rainbow shells?
So a lot of that has to do with the different chemistry in the water in terms of how they lay down lacquer. It's very similar to, abalone can also make pearls just like an oyster can. So right, they get an irritant in them and then they kind of lay down this protective layer in lacquer. And depending on the chemistry in the water, that changes the iridescence or the color of that a little bit. Yes, sir?
Have you ever seen a white shell, like in the ocean?
So 2 of those I did pick out of the ocean myself. I have actually seen live abalone as well in the ocean. Again, I've just never seen black in our tide pools. I've seen green, reds, and pinks. I haven't seen flats and pintos. Those tend to be a little bit more north than where I like to dive because it gets a little bit colder the more north you go. But yeah. Good question. So habitat loss has been one impact to our loss of abalone in California. Another is abalone suffered from a disease called withering foot syndrome. And we don't know exactly what the trigger is. We know it's caused by a bacteria, but we don't know why is it suddenly they became susceptible to this bacteria, and is there kind of a cure or something we can do to prevent this bacteria from going. But essentially, this bacteria causes the abalone to get really tired and fatigued and not eat. And then it makes it really hard for it to develop and keep on to that strong muscular foot. So in that top picture, we have the healthy abalone on the left. That's the animal that would be underneath that shell if you were to look. And on the right side is that withered foot. It's all shrunken and small. That means it can't hang on to those rocks when waves come and beat up on it. It means they're easily overturned for shorebirds to eat, for other organisms to eat. Sea stars like to eat abalone. Anything will take opportunity for doing that. So that's contributed as well. Yes, ma'am?
Does the disease not affect the people, the animals that are eating the
Yeah, the bacteria doesn't seem to have any sort of other adverse effects on other organisms. It just seems to be on abalone species. And it is on all 7 species. Again, but we don't know why. What is it about this bacteria that does it for abalone? So that disease alone killed 99% of our abalone populations. Okay. Overharvesting and poaching of abalone. Again, it doesn't take a lot of skill and cunning to sneak up on a snail and catch it. Got to take a little bit of power. You have to take a crowbar to actually shove it underneath this shell connected to the rock and pop off. But that's it. Okay? Doesn't have ears to listen to me come up on it. Okay? They're not running away from me super fast, so pretty easy to do as long as I have a big enough crowbar and a willingness to do that. Okay? Now, abalone are also hemophiliacs. So when you take that sharp crowbar and you put it underneath, you're most likely going to cut their skin, their foot. And if you do that, they're most likely going to bleed out. So hopefully you got the right size, because if you're like, oh, I can't take this, it's not the right size, I can get in trouble, and you just put it back, it's probably going to die anyways. Okay? Poaching. Abalone is big business. I did that calculation last week. 1 pound of abalone, 16 ounces, is $124. Do you know what a pound of hamburger meat is?
Like $4 or $5.
Yeah, $3-4. Okay? So $124 for the same amount of a protein. Okay? And abalone, because of that strong muscular foot, is quite a tough meat. Imagine taking the bottom of your shoe and biting into it. Okay? You kind of have to beat the crap out of the abalone to tenderize it, okay, before you start eating it. Okay? But there are lots of people that do. There are farm-raised abalone in Korea and Australia. You can actually go to Costco and get canned abalone. It's coming from Australia. It's like $32 a can. You can order it on Amazon as well. Canned abalone from Australia. But again, it's a ridiculous amount for a can. Okay? So if you're a poacher and there's not very much enforcement out there, you go out scuba diving, you find 3-4 abalone, you maybe get a pound or two worth of meat. That may be worth it for you in terms of a cost. Even if you got caught and you have to pay a fine and they confiscate all of your scuba gear when you're caught poaching. Maybe you've made enough money before times that it was still worth it for you. Like, okay, I'll pay the fine and I'll just go buy new gear and come out here later. Because we don't have a lot of enforcement out there because people don't know. So educating the public, being aware of laws and regulations, and knowing what your values are to support different legislation when you get a chance to vote becomes really important as a citizen in the United States and in California. Disease, habitat loss, and overharvesting all have impacted our abalone. This is an old picture from Morro Bay. Told you on Friday I'd talk about this picture. So there was a big abalone cannery in Morro Bay. Those are all shells of abalone behind those guys. The commercial limit for abalone. When I say the word limit, do you all understand what that means? That was like the maximum amount that you could take in a single day. The abalone still had to be a certain size, okay? But the commercial limit for abalone was 12,265 dozen a day. 12,265 dozen a day. That number was only set because that told you there had to have been enough out there to support it. These guys were prolific. Abalone are broadcast spawners, meaning they just shoot egg and sperm into the water, good luck, hope babies happen. But that only works if abalone are within 3 feet of each other, okay? So it's great as a diver when I'm out diving and I see an abalone on that side of the gym, and then I go swim off and I see an abalone on that side of the gym. Wonderful, I'm super happy I saw 2 live abalone. Those things are never gonna meet. They're just not gonna happen. They're never gonna have babies. It's like you finding your dream partner and realizing that they're across the world from you. The chances of you meeting them, super low. Okay, and we are way smarter and move way faster than abalone do. Yes, ma'am?
Can you like take one of the abalones without like hurting it and place it over next to the other abalone?
Could I move the abalone and set them up like a cute little abalone matchmaker? It's difficult. Again, they're hemophiliac, so how do I move that strong muscular foot off of its rock without doing damage? That's really difficult to do. Also, it's really difficult to genderize abalone. There are distinct genders, so there are male and female abalone, but there's no like external part, like I can't look at their shell and be like, there's a boy abalone, I saw a girl abalone over there, I'll just like scooch them next to each other. Abalone, in order to reproduce, have to be in a really healthy environment, meaning they have to have lots of food available to them. That makes their gonads really big, and then you kind of have to like lift underneath their skirt. I know, it sounds weird. But see on that healthy abalone, kind of the frilled black edges of its body? Okay, we kind of reference that as the skirt. So you kind of have to pick that skirt up, check out their gonads and be like, are you a boy or a girl? And then decide. So again, it's really difficult to do in the wild to just move them like that. Which is why people that are trying to bring back and restore them gather different genders, hope that we get enough spawning going on in the lab where we can actually see the babies occurring, and then can we put the babies out and hope that they settle down and survive. And that's usually after a certain size. Abalone, actually let's back up this. Show me with your fingers if you can identify how big a centimeter is. Okay, centimeter is a pretty small amount. Abalone grow about a centimeter a year. So, how old was this guy when he got picked off? Okay. This one's probably, 17, 18. Okay. If you go much smaller, smaller abalone are easy prey for other things, right? It's easy to move a small muscular foot, right, than a big muscular foot. So, how do we protect our baby abalone so that they can get to bigger breeding sizes? Things like our marine protected areas can help with that. If we can create spaces and habitat where nothing can come in, nothing unnatural like people can come in and remove them and hunt them, maybe we have a chance for their populations to come back. Okay? So again, that's why it's really important for you guys to be educated and have an awareness of this history. Yes, sir?
How long do they live?
It's really hard to say because the studies really haven't been done to know, but I mean, we have shells. I mean, literally, I have a shell at home. I didn't bring it because it's one of my favorite, and if I broke it, I would cry. That's bigger than my head, okay? So that's easily a 30, 40-year-old abalone. Could they live longer? Maybe. Those abalone shells, those sizes are not uncommon. Like I said, my friend's neighbor had 80 of these just buried in a hole in their backyard. And they gave them to my friend because they were like, we're free doing in the backyard, we have all these shells here, you're in the ocean, you want them? She's like, oh my God, you know what that is? I'll take them, yes. Okay. And now she's been distributing them out to like all of us. You can also see on some of our shells, so like this one actually had an old sandworm on it. So this is a casing of a sandworm on top. None of mine, oh, there's a small pearl starting right there on the inside. I don't think I really got any of the ones with pearls, but they can develop pearls as well. So the animal hung out in this kind of scar-like area. That's where the muscle was kind of attached onto that shell. There. So, when the abalone canneries closed in the 1980s, we still had all these shells as a waste. So what did we do with them? We buried them in backyards. We put them on fences as decoration. We put dirt in them and maybe used them as pots. We put soap that grandma collected for the last 50 years of her life in them. Or the one that I inherited was used as an ashtray. We've made jewelry more recently out of that lacquer and those materials. Okay? Most of the time now, if you're buying abalone jewelry, it's usually off of farmed abalone. So like the earrings that I'm wearing, these are farmed abalone shells out of Australia. These are not our local species. But maybe you have some local species in your family. So in 1997, we banned all commercial abalone fishing south of San Francisco. This is why the fishery was still going strong in Northern California for a little bit. Currently now, it's the entire coast of California. We do not do any abalone fishing. Again, 2026, maybe we'll get some back. Okay? Sea otter numbers are starting to increase because of their protected status. So this is also affecting the already small population of abalone that we have. Already there's a small number of abalone, and we're increasing our number of sea otters that are also eating abalone. But how do you tell the cute natural sea otters, hey, you can't eat that? Okay, it's really difficult to do. So we don't. Simply, we just don't have enough adult abalone to recruit and spawn to make our babies. So having awareness and restoration efforts. And so recently, there's Diane Dixon declaring black abalone as the state seashell. But also even indigenous artists have brought awareness to the cultural significance of abalone. The exhibit just closed, but for the past year at the Getty Museum in LA, there was a local Tongvan artist that displayed 12-foot abalone shells. These were made, these were not naturally 12 feet long abalone shells, but to bring an awareness about the importance of abalone in our California culture, and specifically to original people here in California. Supporting restoration efforts, knowing where your food comes from, all those things become really important if you're really concerned about the sustainability of different fisheries and food securities. So I've got a couple of things for you. Again, you can always email me for this presentation if you like, if you need any, if you have any questions, need any pictures, things like that. I've got my shells down below. I do also have a reference for you to look at. You can look at all different 7 species of abalone and kind of where they're found in some things, as well as Laguna Ocean Foundation is donating a book to your school library all about abalone in California, so this will be in the library for you as well. You can look up specific restoration efforts, you can look at a certain species, anything like that. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, great questions. Have a good rest of your day, enjoy your 3-day weekend, all of those things. Thank you so much.